Have you ever met a stranger who, in just a brief moment, changed the course of your day, or maybe even your life? A simple encounter, a fleeting interaction that leaves an emotional mark long after it ends? This is the story of Lee Sang-heon, a man who, one day, found himself standing at the crossroads of an unexpected encounter that would leave him questioning the true meaning of connection. It was a typical afternoon when Lee Sang-heon found himself waiting at the train station, lost in his thoughts. He had just finished a meeting and was heading home after a long day, eager to relax and unwind. But as he stood near the platform, something caught his eye: a woman standing by herself, a suitcase beside her, staring out at the tracks with a faraway look in her eyes. There was something about her presence that seemed different, almost as if she was waiting for something or someone. As the minutes passed and the train's arrival drew near, Lee Sang-heon noticed the sadness in her eyes. It wasn't the kind of sadness that was loud and obvious. No, it was subtle, a quiet pain, the kind of sorrow that only someone who had experienced loss could understand. And for some reason, Lee Sang-heon couldn't tear his eyes away from her. It was as if the universe had pulled him into this moment, compelling him to do something he couldn't quite explain. Without thinking, he took a few steps toward her and cleared his throat softly, drawing her attention. The woman turned, surprised, as if she hadn't expected anyone to speak to her. Lee Sang-heon felt a rush of emotion he couldn't quite name, and before he could second-guess himself, he said, "Are you okay? You seem like you're waiting for something." Her eyes flickered with surprise, but there was also a sadness that lingered there. She gave him a small, almost imperceptible nod. "I'm just leaving," she said softly. "I'm leaving behind everything, everyone. It's hard to know if I'm making the right choice." There was a quiet honesty in her voice that struck Lee Sang-heon, and something in his heart softened. He could tell that she wasn't just talking about a literal journey, but an emotional one as well. He wasn't sure why, but he felt compelled to reach out, to offer some kind of comfort to this stranger who seemed so lost and yet so familiar at the same time. "I know it's hard," Lee Sang-heon said, his voice filled with empathy. "Sometimes, we have to let go of things in order to move forward, even if it feels like we're leaving behind pieces of ourselves." The woman's eyes softened as she looked at him, her shoulders relaxing just slightly. "I don't know what the future holds," she admitted. "I don't know if I'm doing the right thing, but it feels like I have no other choice." There was something in her words that resonated deeply with Lee Sang-heon. He, too, had been at a crossroads many times in his life, faced with decisions that felt impossible. Sometimes, the hardest part of moving forward was taking that first step, the one that would lead you into the unknown. As the train arrived, the woman gathered her belongings, her face reflecting the weight of her decision. She paused for a moment and looked at Lee Sang-heon. "Thank you," she said softly, almost as if she were speaking to a friend she had known for years. "For listening." Lee Sang-heon nodded, his heart heavy with the unspoken words between them. "I hope you find what you're looking for," he said quietly, feeling a deep sense of connection to this stranger, even though their paths would likely never cross again. And then, without another word, the woman boarded the train, her suitcase rolling behind her as she disappeared into the distance. Lee Sang-heon stood there, watching as the train pulled away, a mixture of emotions swirling inside him. He hadn't expected to meet someone like her today. He hadn't expected to feel so deeply connected to a stranger, even for a moment. But there was something about the way she had shared her vulnerability with him, how they had connected without even knowing each other, that left him thinking. Sometimes, life gave you these brief moments of clarity, moments when you met someone, shared a glance, a word, or an understanding, and it was as if, for a fleeting second, you both carried each other's stories. Lee Sang-heon had no idea what the woman's future held, but he hoped, with all his heart, that it would be filled with peace, hope, and the strength to move forward. As he left the station, he realized that sometimes the most profound connections weren't the ones that lasted, but the ones that made you feel alive, that made you see the world with new eyes. Lee Sang-heon couldn't shake the feeling of that brief encounter. As he walked through the busy streets of the city, the image of the woman on the train platform stayed with him. There was a certain weight to her words, an unspoken sadness that had stirred something deep within him. He found himself thinking about her decision to leave, to walk away from everything familiar, and he couldn't help but wonder what had led her to this point. What was she running from? What was she hoping to find? It wasn't just her sadness that had impacted him, it was the rawness of her emotions, the vulnerability that she had shared with a complete stranger. Most people, including himself, would have avoided opening up to someone they didn't know. But for her, that brief moment of connection seemed to offer a kind of release, as if speaking her truth had given her some kind of relief. Lee Sang-heon couldn't help but reflect on his own life. Had he ever been that open with someone? Had he ever shared his deepest fears, his darkest thoughts with anyone, without the fear of judgment or misunderstanding? The truth was, he hadn't. He had always kept his emotions tucked away, carefully guarded from the world. But in that moment with the stranger, he felt something stir within him, a desire to be more honest, to be more vulnerable, and to let go of the walls he had built around himself. That night, as he sat in his apartment, Lee Sang-heon couldn't stop thinking about what had happened. He kept going over the conversation in his mind, replaying her words and the way they had connected so briefly, so intensely. He realized that he had never fully allowed himself to open up to anyone in that way. He had always been afraid that if he did, he might lose control or be seen as weak. But maybe, just maybe, there was strength in vulnerability. Maybe there was freedom in letting go of the fear of judgment. The next morning, Lee Sang-heon decided to take a different approach to his life. He had spent too long protecting himself from the world, hiding behind the walls of his own making. He wasn't sure where this new path would lead him, but he was ready to find out. He made a promise to himself: he would start living more authentically, no longer holding back his true feelings. Over the next few weeks, Lee Sang-heon took small steps toward opening up. He called old friends, reconnected with family members, and even shared more of himself at work. At first, it felt awkward, almost unnatural, but gradually, he began to feel the weight lifting. The more he spoke his truth, the more he felt a sense of relief, like he was finally shedding layers he had been carrying for years. It wasn't always easy, and there were moments when he felt exposed, vulnerable in a way he wasn't used to. But he also started to notice something important: people were responding. They weren't judging him, they were listening, supporting, and opening up to him in return. It was as if his own vulnerability had created a space for others to do the same, and in that space, connections were formed, relationships were strengthened, and trust was built. One day, while having lunch with a close friend, Lee Sang-heon shared something personal that he had never talked about before. He spoke about his fear of failure, his struggle to let go of control, and the emotional barriers he had built over the years. To his surprise, his friend didn't react with pity or discomfort. Instead, they simply nodded, acknowledging his feelings with kindness and understanding. "You're not alone in this," his friend said. "We all have our fears, our insecurities. But it takes a lot of courage to admit them. And you're doing it. That's the first step toward healing." Lee Sang-heon smiled, feeling a warmth spread through him. For the first time in a long time, he didn't feel like he had to hide or pretend. He didn't have to be perfect. He could just be himself, flaws and all, and that was enough. As time went on, Lee Sang-heon continued to embrace this new approach to life. He allowed himself to be vulnerable, to open up, and to build deeper connections with the people around him. He didn't know where this path would lead, but he was no longer afraid to find out. He had learned that the most powerful connections came not from perfection, but from shared humanity, from the willingness to be open and real with others. One day, as he walked through the park, Lee Sang-heon happened to glance at the train station where he had first met the woman. He paused for a moment, his heart heavy with the memory of their brief encounter. He didn't know where she was now, or what her future held, but he hoped that wherever she was, she had found peace, and that she had learned, as he had, to embrace vulnerability as a source of strength. He smiled to himself, feeling a quiet sense of gratitude for that chance meeting, for the lesson she had unknowingly taught him. And as he continued on his walk, he felt more at ease than he had in years. The world was vast and uncertain, but he was ready to face it with an open heart. After that night, Lee Sang-heon found himself reflecting more on the connections he had made, the ones that had changed him in ways he couldn't have anticipated. His encounter with the woman at the train station had opened up a part of him that he didn't even know was closed. He had always believed that meaningful connections required years of knowing someone, countless shared experiences, and a deep understanding. But the truth he had come to realize was that sometimes, it only took a few words, a brief encounter, or even a fleeting moment for two people to touch each other's lives in ways they could never imagine. The more Lee Sang-heon thought about it, the more he realized that life was full of these moments of unexpected, fleeting connection, where two strangers could meet, share a piece of their story, and then go their separate ways, forever changed. It made him think about how often he had rushed through life, focusing on the future or the next big milestone, without fully embracing the present or appreciating the people who crossed his path. One evening, he decided to go to a local bookstore, a place where he had spent many hours over the years, losing himself in the pages of novels and stories. This time, however, he was not looking for an escape. Instead, he wanted to simply be present, to take his time and experience the store for what it was, an opportunity to be surrounded by new worlds, different perspectives, and the quiet comfort of the written word. As he walked through the aisles, scanning the bookshelves, he overheard a conversation between two strangers at the counter. The woman was speaking softly, her voice trembling slightly as she talked about leaving for a new city, a new life. The words she spoke were familiar, almost identical to the words the woman at the train station had shared with him. The same uncertainty, the same sadness, the same longing to start over but unsure of what that would look like. Something stirred inside Lee Sang-heon. He knew this feeling, this weight of decision, the fear of the unknown. Without thinking, he approached the counter, standing just behind the woman. She hadn't noticed him yet, but the intensity of her words pulled him in. "I just feel like I'm leaving so much behind," the woman said. "It's hard to know if I'm making the right choice, but it's the only choice I can make. I have to try." Lee Sang-heon's heart went out to her. He had been in her shoes not too long ago, standing at the edge of an uncertain future, unsure of whether he was doing the right thing or making a mistake. But in that moment, he remembered how small, seemingly insignificant words had given him the courage to take the next step. He remembered how the simple act of being heard had made all the difference. Taking a deep breath, Lee Sang-heon gently tapped her on the shoulder. She turned, startled, but he simply offered her a warm, reassuring smile. "I don't mean to intrude," Lee Sang-heon said softly, "but I couldn't help overhearing what you said. I just wanted to say that I understand. And if you're afraid, that's okay. But sometimes, the hardest choices are the ones that lead us to the most important changes." The woman looked at him, a little taken aback by the sudden interaction, but then her expression softened. There was a vulnerability in her eyes, a quiet relief that she hadn't expected. "I don't know what I'm doing," she said, her voice breaking slightly. "I'm scared I'm making a mistake, but I need to go. I need to try." Lee Sang-heon nodded, his voice full of empathy. "It's normal to be scared. Change is hard. But remember, it's not about getting everything right. It's about trying, about taking that first step. And even if it doesn't go as planned, you'll learn and grow from it. It's all part of the journey." The woman seemed to process his words for a moment before giving him a small, appreciative smile. "Thank you," she said quietly. "That means more than you know." Lee Sang-heon smiled back, feeling the deep connection that had been made in such a short time. It was a fleeting moment, one that neither of them would likely ever remember in detail, but it had left a lasting impact on both of them. He wasn't sure why he had approached her, or why he had felt so strongly compelled to speak, but something about her vulnerability had called out to him, just as his own had once done. As he left the bookstore that evening, Lee Sang-heon felt a renewed sense of purpose. He had connected with someone who needed to hear the words he had said, just as he had once needed to hear them himself. It wasn't just about giving advice, it was about showing up, being present, and offering a small piece of yourself to someone who was going through something difficult. In that moment, Lee Sang-heon realized that the most powerful connections weren't always the ones we plan for or expect. Sometimes, they happened in the most unexpected places and times, with strangers who, for a brief moment, became a part of our story. The next few days felt different to Lee Sang-heon. There was a quiet joy in his heart that hadn't been there before, a sense of fulfillment that came from the small but meaningful interactions he had with others. It wasn't just the conversation with the woman at the bookstore that had made an impact, it was the realization that even the briefest connections could change lives, if only we allowed ourselves to be open to them. He spent the following week reflecting on how these unexpected encounters were shaping him. Each time he opened himself up to someone, whether it was a friend, a family member, or even a stranger, he felt more connected to the world around him. He realized that the more he embraced vulnerability, the more he allowed others to see who he really was, the more authentic his connections became. One evening, as he walked home from work, Lee Sang-heon passed by the same park where he had met the woman at the train station months earlier. It had become a place of quiet reflection for him, a place where he could pause, breathe, and think. This time, however, as he entered the park, he noticed a familiar face sitting on a bench. It was the same woman from the bookstore. She looked up as he approached, her expression surprised but warm. "You," she said softly. "I didn't expect to see you again." Lee Sang-heon smiled and sat down beside her. "I didn't expect it either," he said. "But I'm glad I did." She chuckled, and for a moment, they simply sat in silence, watching the sunset. The moment felt comfortable, as though they had known each other for years, even though their interaction had been brief. "How have you been?" Lee Sang-heon asked after a while, genuinely curious. The woman looked at him, her eyes filled with gratitude. "I'd been better, actually," she said. "I made the decision to leave, to take the job. It was scary, and it still is, but I'm learning to embrace it. I'm starting to believe that this was the right choice after all." Lee Sang-heon nodded, his heart swelling with pride for her. "That's amazing. I'm glad to hear it. Sometimes the hardest steps lead us to the best places." She smiled, looking at him with a mixture of admiration and appreciation. "You were right, she said softly. "That day, at the bookstore, your words really stayed with me. They helped me push through the fear, even when I wanted to turn back." Lee Sang-heon was surprised by how much her words meant to him. He had never expected that small moment to have such a lasting impact, but it seemed as though his simple act of kindness had made all the difference. "I'm happy to hear that," he replied sincerely. "Sometimes we just need someone to remind us that it's okay to be afraid, but it's also okay to keep moving forward." They both sat in quiet contemplation for a while, each of them processing the weight of the conversation and the unspoken bond they had formed. Lee Sang-heon realized that the connections he had made in his life, whether through friends, family, or even strangers, were what gave his life meaning. It wasn't the achievements, the career, or the milestones, it was the shared moments, the simple exchanges of kindness and understanding, that made life truly rich. Eventually, the woman stood up, gathering her things as she prepared to leave. "I have to go," she said with a soft smile. "But I'm really grateful for this moment. I'll remember it." Lee Sang-heon stood up as well, feeling a sense of fulfillment in his heart. "It was nice to meet you, truly," he said. "And I wish you all the best on your journey. You're stronger than you know." She smiled warmly at him. "Thank you. I'm glad we met. You gave me more than just advice that day, you gave me the courage to keep going." As she walked away, Lee Sang-heon watched her go, feeling a deep sense of gratitude for the brief but impactful encounter they had shared. He had no way of knowing where her journey would take her, but he knew one thing for certain: their paths had crossed for a reason, and in that brief moment, they had both found something they needed. Walking away from the park, Lee Sang-heon felt a renewed sense of purpose. He realized that the power of connection wasn't about changing someone's life forever or making a huge impact, it was about being present in the moment, showing kindness when it was needed, and offering a piece of yourself to another person, even if just for a short time. He didn't know what tomorrow would bring, but he was certain that these small moments of connection were the ones that truly shaped a meaningful life. As time passed, Lee Sang-heon continued to embrace the philosophy of living fully in each moment, valuing every connection he made. His life was no longer defined by routines or expectations, it was guided by the relationships he nurtured and the sincerity he brought to each of his interactions. Each person he met, whether for a few minutes or for years, became a part of the story he was writing. He started to feel a deep sense of fulfillment in these interactions, recognizing that no encounter was ever truly insignificant. One afternoon, as he was walking through the city on his way home, Lee Sang-heon spotted a familiar face across the street. It was the woman from the park, the one he had shared that brief but meaningful conversation with. This time, she was sitting on a bench in front of a cafe, looking down at her phone. Without thinking, he crossed the street and approached her, a smile spreading across his face. "Hey, you," he said, walking up to her. She looked up, her expression lighting up in surprise. You again. What a coincidence, she said, standing up to greet him. Lee Sang-heon chuckled. I guess the universe wants us to cross paths again. They sat down at a nearby table, sharing stories about their lives since they last met. The woman shared how she had settled into her new life, the challenges she had faced, and how much she had grown since leaving. She spoke about how difficult it had been at first, but how each day, she was learning to embrace the newness, the uncertainty, and the excitement that came with it. I can't believe how much has changed in such a short amount of time, she said, her eyes gleaming with a mix of pride and reflection. I've learned more about myself than I ever thought possible. And every time I doubt myself, I remember what you said to me, that it's okay to be afraid, but it's also okay to keep moving forward. Lee Sang-heon smiled warmly, feeling grateful that his words had left such a lasting impact. I'm really happy for you. It's not easy to take those big steps, but it sounds like you've really embraced the change. You've grown stronger because of it. The woman nodded, her expression softening. I feel like I've finally found a place where I belong. And it's all because I was willing to take the leap, even when I wasn't sure of the outcome. Lee Sang-heon thought for a moment, a realization dawning on him. I think that's the key, isn't it? It's not about knowing everything or having it all figured out, it's about being open to what comes next, even if it scares you. It's about trusting that, no matter what happens, you'll be okay. You'll find your way. The woman smiled at him, her eyes filled with gratitude. You've helped me see that. I was so afraid of leaving, of stepping into the unknown, but you made me realize that it wasn't about being fearless, it was about moving forward anyway. And now, here I am, building a life I never thought possible. Lee Sang-heon looked at her, a sense of pride swelling in his chest. I'm proud of you. I know how hard it was, but you've done it. You've created something beautiful for yourself. For a long moment, they sat in comfortable silence, simply appreciating the present. The world around them continued to rush by, but in this small corner of the cafe, everything felt still, everything felt right. As they said their goodbyes, Lee Sang-heon felt a deep sense of contentment. Their paths had crossed for a reason, and he was grateful for the brief but powerful connection they had shared. It had reminded him of the power of kindness, the strength of vulnerability, and the importance of embracing life's uncertainties. He walked away from the cafe, his heart full of gratitude for the encounters, both big and small, that had shaped his journey. There would always be moments of fear, of doubt, of uncertainty. But Lee Sang-heon had learned that the most important thing was to keep moving forward, to keep reaching out to others, and to always remain open to the possibility of change. With each step he took, he felt more and more connected to the world around him. It wasn't about avoiding the difficult moments, it was about facing them head-on, knowing that the connections we make with others are what truly give life its meaning. Weeks passed, and Lee Sang-heon continued to grow, both personally and emotionally. The connections he had made, the interactions that once seemed fleeting, had transformed his perspective on life. He had learned to embrace vulnerability, to understand that every moment was an opportunity to connect, and that sometimes, the briefest encounters left the most lasting impressions. It was a rainy afternoon when his phone buzzed with a message from the woman he had met at the cafe. Her message was simple, but it carried a weight of emotion that Lee Sang-heon instantly felt. I just wanted to thank you again. Everything you said to me back then, everything you shared, it's still with me. It's been a turning point in my life. I'm finally at peace with my choices. Lee Sang-heon stared at the message for a moment, the words sinking into him like a deep breath. It was as if, in that brief conversation, they had both found something they didn't realize they were looking for. He quickly typed back, his heart full of appreciation, I'm so glad to hear that. You've done the hard work, I'm just happy I could be a small part of your journey. As he hit send, Lee Sang-heon felt a quiet sense of pride in himself. It wasn't about the praise or the acknowledgement, it was about knowing that in some small way, he had made a difference. Sometimes, the smallest actions had the most profound impact, and those moments, however brief, could change lives. Later that evening, as he sat in his living room, sipping on tea, Lee Sang-heon thought back to his own journey. The woman at the train station, the bookstore encounter, and every person who had crossed his path, they had all been a part of his growth. And in the same way, he had been a part of theirs. Lee Sang-heon realized that life wasn't just about personal success or achieving goals. It was about the people we met, the relationships we formed, and the lessons we shared. It was about learning to be open to the unknown, to be vulnerable, and to offer kindness and understanding whenever possible. The next morning, as he walked through the streets, Lee Sang-heon felt a renewed sense of connection to the world. There was beauty in every interaction, no matter how small, and he had learned that true strength didn't come from keeping people at a distance but from allowing them in, from sharing pieces of yourself and seeing how that opened the door to deeper understanding. He had come a long way since that first moment at the train station, when a chance encounter with a stranger had set him on a path of reflection and change. Lee Sang-heon knew that his journey was far from over, but for the first time in a long time, he felt at peace with the uncertainty. He was no longer afraid to take the next step, knowing that every connection he made along the way would guide him forward. And as he walked through the city that morning, feeling the cool breeze against his face, he couldn't help but smile. Life, with all of its unpredictability and challenges, was beautiful in its simplicity. And he was ready to embrace whatever came next. If you've made it this far, type connection in the comments.